It looks like people are slowly coming in from lunch. It is now 1:30, which is time to start. If someone doesn't mind shutting the back doors, just so we have a little less noise. Welcome to Montreal and Netmod. I'm Lou Berger, Kent Watson, Joel Jegley with me, my co-chairs. The meeting material is in the usual spots. We are doing Etherpad also. You can see the Etherpad link, which somehow drifted to the bottom. You can also find that off the tools page. Please join in and help us capture what's being said at the mic, comments on the mic and responses. We don't need to capture everything that's said in the slides. Did not go to the next page. Hold on. Aha. We are at the IETF, which means we have rules that govern our participation. You can find that under our note well. This is a summary of those rules. If you're interested in or unfamiliar with them, please go to the URL, www.ietf.org, about notewell.html. That'll also give you a pointer to the governing documents. Since we are Monday, it's worth taking a look at that, make sure you're familiar with that. As usual, we're doing video streaming as well as audio streaming and recording. Please make sure you state your name if you come to the mic. That's very important for those who are remote as well as anyone taking notes. I will be jumping on Jabber. If there's other people who are willing to jump on Jabber and to help channel those who may be remote, we appreciate that. I think we have had an agenda change. I'll talk about that in a moment. We wanted 2.5 hours because we thought 2 hours was a little tight. We try to squeeze into that. Because we asked for 2 hours, that bumped us into a second slot, which means we have a lot more time than that. So in theory, we're here to almost 6 o'clock. That seems like a long time from now. I don't doubt that we'll use all the time. That said, we have added a couple of topics that we think are useful use of the working group's time. And I'll show that in a moment. One important note, when we go from this room to the next room, there's no coffee break. Actually, more importantly, is we are moving rooms, but we're just moving one room to the right between the sessions. We've organized the agenda just by laying it out in terms of anticipated amount of time on each topic. Since we do have extra time, we're going to be a little flexible in how long each topic goes. If we're having good conversation, we're not going to break that, which means that we're not exactly sure what's going to line up with the session break. So we're just going to go in the order that's in the published agenda, and that's captured here. This slide is unchanged. This side of the agenda is unchanged. The design team items are unchanged. The non-charter items are from what's previously been published, but we've added a topic that's come up on some. It came up on the list, and there's been some more private discussion related to it. But we think it's a good topic for the work group to talk about, and that's sort of how to deal with some of these NMDA transition issues. So we'll be hitting that at the end of at our agenda. If there's other topics we can probably that have been discussed publicly on the list, we're happy to take those also.
Balázs Lengyel Eriksson, can you say a few words about what's up with Yang Next?
Okay. So there's been no update to Yang Next since the last IETF meeting where we had met. I think primarily I'd asked, I think the main issue is we don't have someone to drive the discussion. In particular, folks are probably looking at me, not just because I'm in the front of the room, but because I had coordinated several of those meetings before to do that. But at the moment, I don't have the bandwidth to actually drive those discussions, much less even coordinate the meetings for the discussions to be had. I did ask someone to do that, but they also had not really signed up to do that. And so that's where we're at right now. It's just sort of a limbo waiting for someone to have the bandwidth to actually drive the discussions. So the bottom line is that there's been no progress since last meeting.
Yeah, I also think that the design team activity that we're going to hear about is probably taking a bunch of attention from those who might also participate in Yang Next. So my personal view, not as someone who is contributing to that work, my personal view is once the current design team winds down, there may be some more energy to look at Yang Next. So we've had some nice progress since the last meeting. We have a couple of new RFCs. It's always good to see those. Remember, that is why we're here. It's not to have good discussions, although we appreciate that. It's actually to produce these documents. We have one document that is on its way to the ISG, and another one that I was hoping to push submit on, but we need an update published. Unless I missed it today, which is possible. Kent is such a slacker. He only had a chair another meeting this morning, so he was one who needs to push OK. So maybe we'll have it this week. But as soon as that happens, artwork folding will be submitted. There was really some minor things related to copyright from what the trust requests for code segments. And there's a code segment in this document. So that got updated. And as soon as that is published, I'll hit submit on that. Speaking of Shepherd. We have a couple of documents that are not on the interfaces section. Is on. Yeah, so I feel like we had something else, but geolocation is definitely not on the agenda. Is Chris in the room? I warned him I was going to put him on the spot. I guess he decided not to be here. There was a little bit of a discussion on the list about geolocation. It looks like that is getting pretty close to being done. So if you have opinions on it, it'd be really good to get that.
Rob Wilton, I think it's probably the updated Yang types is probably maybe the other one that's not on the agenda, or is that on?
That's the one.
That's the one, in fact, it's listed right here to mention. So thanks for that, appreciate that. So at the last meeting, we had an update on these updated Yang types, and we were actually hoping to move that document through really quickly. And we haven't seen an update. Jürgen is online, and if he feels like mentioning something, he's welcome to enter the queue. But we're really gated by the authors pushing that forward. Seeing no one in queue, go to the next slide. I feel like I should turn this over to Joel. So we, Joel, you want to take it? Or? All right, thanks, appreciate it. There has been a recent discussion on the list about an errata, and then we realized there's actually a whole slew of erratas that we really haven't verified as a working group. Now, technically, the AD is the one who verifies an errata, but generally the ADs take input from the working group. So we think it's worthwhile to go through each of these. We're not going to go through each of them now, but we think it is worthwhile to go through each of these as individuals, as the working group, and agree on what we think the right answer is of whether or not these should be verified or not. Now, I think we had a couple of them that we had identified as should be rejected. For some reason, there's only one listed here. I thought we had listed two.
Yeah, the second one was 574, which you can see is as an errata lodged against RC 7950. That received significant discussion on the list fairly recently. We think that should be rejected as well.
And the other one that should be rejected, we took a look at, and it's actually a technical change. And one thing to keep in mind is that if you see something in an RFC and would like to modify the behavior of that RFC such that others implement that changed behavior, the right way to do that is in a DIS or a new RFC that updates the existing RFC. You can't do a technical change through an errata. So this is asking for, that particular one that's being rejected is asking for a substantive technical change that would impact all implementations of the document. I mean, it's just adding a default, so it's not like a controversial thing, but you just can't do that type of technical change in the errata just by our process. So that's something to keep in mind. It is going to be important that we go through each of these and as a working group have a response. We'll probably push that as chairs to, if there isn't something that has a clear discussion. On the other one, 5784, which is the recent discussion, clearly that's going to, we think that's going to be rejected, and we'll close the conversation if it's not otherwise closed. If you have opinions on these, we would like to hear them. We can hear them right now. If you came prepared to talk about any of them, as Joel asked. If you have not, we can take it to the list. Any comments? Okay. That appears to be the last one in this package. So we're going to move on to Rob and talking about the last call.
Yes, sorry. Do I need to repeat that? Is that okay?
I think you're, well, you should ask that question.
Okay, so more reviews, please. Then I'm saying that one of the issues has been raised by EC. I've had verbal comment from him yesterday. I think he's happy, but we'll discuss that today. And then there's a separate issue raised on MTU, not related to this document, but more generally. But I'm proposing we discuss and have a potential change to this draft for that. So the issue that AC raised here, I mean, his actual text is there, but basically he's saying the RFC 3635 defined a load of Ethernet-like counters, statistics, and maybe we should include a subset of those into this draft. And in particular, he noted that this draft has one counter for reporting destination MAC drops, but none of the other ones there. Well, there's some sort of background history to this, and that's really that we looked at that RFC, another one, we looked at the current Ether-like MIB, and I looked at the 822.3 manageability interface clause 30, and I had a spreadsheet that effectively correlated these different counters and things. And the upshot of all of that is that the vast majority of the counters that AC was asking for are either included in the 802.3.2, which is the Yang model for 802.3 that's standardized by EEE, or they regarded as being effectively obsolete counters and we don't want to carry them forward. But there were two exceptions to that that aren't included in there that are worth discussing. The first one is whether we want to add a sub-interface demux drop counter. So this would be on the trunk parent interface is if you've got many sub-interfaces and they're each classifying traffic in different ways, and a frame comes in that can't be classified to any sub-interface and you drop it, we don't currently have a drop counter for that. I think that might be worth adding in, is my opinion. So that's relatively easy to add in, I think. Is there anyone who has an opinion on that or is opposed to that? Okay, if not, I'll assume I'll add it in, and that's fine. That's fairly easy. Then the second one is more interesting. It's about the Ethernet histogram statistics, and this is what they look like. So this is defined in one of the existing MIBs or RFCs, and it gives a breakdown of the number of packets received based on the length of that frame that came in. And what's sort of interesting here is that this has been set up to accommodate single tagged frames, or in fact, actually this might include CRC bytes, or untagged frames. And when you get to these boundaries, then it gets a bit trickier where you have like Q and Q or double framed, double VLAN tagged packets. And also the 82.3 has a interesting view of how you handle jumbo frames. So I don't think they're specifically disallowed, but I don't think either the spec really sort of wants to talk about them or standardize them. Whereas if you want to fill out this table properly, you want to go up to about 9K as well.
The IEEE has a long and proud tradition of not standardizing the larger frame sizes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I did get a comment from them about it, but anyway, still. So when in discussion with them,
what happened to 64 byte packets?
they're included in the standard drops. So they'll be classified as a short. This is a separate counter for 64 byte.
Well, that's not short. That's legal.
There's counters for it. I can't remember what the name of it. There's loads of them.
It just seems really weird that it's 65.
Yeah, there is a 64 one as well, but it's not included in this set because there's already a specific counter for frames that size, I think. So when there was discussion, when we were doing the work with 82.3, and I didn't follow that through all the way to the end, I was involved in the earlier parts of that. As I say here, they didn't really want to standardize these histogram counters, and there's various issues. And then the other sort of issue that comes up is that because there hasn't been a good standard here that goes to these higher ranges, that different vendors' hardware does different things. They choose different bucket sizes. So you can't really usefully define these bucket sizes and expect people to rev their ASICs to now support them. That doesn't make sense. So there was a proposal maybe that we could standardize this as part of IETF instead. And the suggestion is...
Who made that suggestion?
David Law, so the chair of 82.3.
Yeah, okay. We're going to have to be awful careful here to make sure what IETF has sometimes, without intending to, or maybe without paying attention, has stepped on the IEEE's toes. I know you sit on the coordination committee. It would be good to bring this up specifically. I guess they meet Saturday. Are they meeting this time?
I don't know. I haven't checked actually. I'm not sure with David Law's here, but it might be easier for me to email him directly first and then see. And that actually I think would be.
Bring it up in that the coordination committee to make sure that we don't need a liaison.
Yes. So this came out of effectively the discussions when I was sitting in 82.3 Yang discussions. So that's where this came up, and that was the suggestion at the time. But that might be a way of getting around the rules pragmatically. So effectively, the proposal here is that you could, rather than having strict bucket definitions, we could return a list of bucket entries where each bucket entry defines what the range is covering, a low and high end inclusive, and account for the packets that match that bucket range. So it's a bit more verbose in terms of the data model, but it's more flexible. At the same time, we would give recommendations in the description to say, we recommend you choose these bucket sizes. So trying to sort of encourage heading towards a consistency in some way. So I had the question is, do I add these in now or can these be deferred? So I think the question is, do we try and do this now in this working group last call at all? or if we do want to try and do this, I can speak to David Law and find out whether he's happy for us to do this. In fact, I can knock it up and say, look, this is what it would look like. But that's my question is this the right time to be even trying to do this? And that's maybe a question to the chairs.
And for my opinion, we should see what the working group thinks.
Okay. Does anyone in the working group care?
So I guess Casey is probably an LSR, so,
Yeah.
Since he's the chair of it. So we can assume there's one hand going up about care.
Well, I don't know on this specific one. Yeah, I don't know on that. I think probably he would. I don't know if he had any opinion on whether to try and delay this work to finish that off or not.
Other opinions?
So,
Name, please.
Tim Carey, Nokia. So the question I would really have is that those sizes that were there for identified for various reasons, right? You know, for good reasons at the time, right? And so the question is that, and they have tools and tests that go around that, right? And so what we said is okay, we're going to provide some, you know, abstraction, if you will, or ability to do some meta work on that, such that we can, you know, define the ranges themselves and then provide some guidelines to different pieces. The problem is that when you say you have a guideline, now you don't have anything that you can standardize, that I as a client and I as a server can really agree upon. I just deal with sections, so I can't guarantee that certain servers that would implement these things would implement, say, packet size 256 through 511. So I can't really rely on that, right? I have to use a mechanism, maybe an operator has to get involved and stuff like that. And so that's the biggest concern that I have of using, you know, the abstract portion of this, is that you've lost now the first classness of the will of that range that people can depend upon when they're applying.
So that's a good point. My aim is not to change these bucket sizes here. So that's not what I'm trying to change. I think everyone who implements these will implement at least these bucket sizes.
Yeah, but there's people that are implementing things that might not know that they need to implement those specific sizes. So
Yeah.
that's the problem that I have.
It's the ones that are bigger than that. It's the ones that go up to like 2K, 4K, 8K. Those are the ones where, and especially around that 14, 15, 18 byte bucket size, you get more inconsistency.
Right. So my question is that where do we put is there a place where we would put ranges that if they do implement those that they would be able to provide a normative stance to it, right? That's the thing, that maybe it's an identity, maybe it's something of that nature.
Yeah, maybe.
Right.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, Joel Yeagley. I definitely see the existing values as being a product of historical decisions that were made in the IEEE. Like, I mean, you know, when you decide that you need something bigger than 1500 because you added a VLAN tag, right? That is a specific historical decision. Like, there's a lot of increments that you could come up with above 1500 that have various kinds of historical meaning, but are not specifically like anchored to IEEE standards. So you're going to end up with like, you know, 1519 to 1540, and then 1540 to say 4470, and then, you know, 9000, 9014, 9100, 9120, and then every Ethernet vendor trolley specification up to there. And then Intel will want 16K because it's a round number, right? So, like, I actually see the likelihood of us getting a really like good list that goes above this as like in a short period of time, that the IEEE will go, yeah, that's cool, as being pretty low. So maybe we shouldn't, if from my vantage point, maybe we shouldn't do that between the last call and hopefully when we take it to IETF last call. All right, that seems like a risky item to add to progressing this.
So just for clarity, you're saying it'd be best to shelve this effectively at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is good enough. Like, I mean, from my vantage point as a jumbo frame user, you know, they either are jumbos or they aren't.
So
But that's my network. Like I don't spend a lot of time distinguishing between the, say, the 9100 byte packets and the 9000 byte packets because I know what my MTU is set to.
Yeah.
Right.
So for clarity, these counters, the ones you see here, are not defined in any Yang model today.
Right.
So we don't have those at all. So so IEEE shied away from putting these in for historical reasons because of where they need to get up to.
Yes, but these sorts of boundaries exist. These boundaries that we have here, particularly the last one, are very specific to historical precedent. So, like these seem uncontroversial, like because they're kind of widely implemented in you know encounters that we already use, right?
Okay.
Like, so doing them in Yang doesn't seem that weird.
Okay.
So the values here are not listed in any IEEE spec, correct?
Correct. Is that true? I don't know. I'd have to check whether, I can't remember if the IEEE Ethernet Management API, the clause 30 defines counters for these. I sort of suspect it probably doesn't, but it should have done. But
well, they probably would have specifically avoided defining anything called max that was above 1519 because that has its own political implications, right?
okay.
Yeah, I think my inclination would be to stick with paralleling what is in the IEEE interface specs.
But I guess the point, from my point of view, is there's no reason for us to add these counters if we're going to stop at 1518 or 1519, whatever. That doesn't seem a good reason for why we would choose to do that, because they're choosing not to standardize these counters. They could have done these if they wanted to. So if we want to do it, we probably want to at least fix it so it works for other use cases higher. So even if we define this, we could have hard-coded counters for these ones, and then the ability to define extra ones if people want them above that, and give some recommendations of just doubling the size each time. That's what I would do. I'd do 1520 through to 2048.
So if we were doing this on an IP interface basis, I would have no issue with that, or no concerns whatsoever.
Okay.
The fact that we're doing this on Ethernet interfaces, it makes me a little sensitive.
We're saying something about Ethernet.
Right.
At the point where we select these values, I think those values exist because.
Dan Bogdanovic, one thing is on the Ethernet that people are starting to count more are jumbo frames. I don't see any jumbo frames here. And
Well,
this,
that's the whole conversation.
main point.
Yeah.
That's what he's driving.
so, but then, because between anything around 1500s to, there are different numbers there. There are different NTU sizes. And there are so many variations, but then jumbo frames, you know, like the 9Ks one is where they really get interested in.
Right, but is it, you know, is it 9000, 9001, 9100, 9120, 16K?
But
Like,
I would say anything above 1600, put it as a jumbo frame, and, you know, but 1519, what we do if you have like 1522?
But
So like put it up to 1600, and anything above 1600 count as a jumbo frame.
But then what's the point of having these counters at all? What's the point of getting histogram counters for anything below 1500, say, or 1519, but not having them above? Seems like you're getting 2/3 of the information. Either the information is useful or it's not.
So I can tell you from some debugging, the MTU sizes, and there's so many variants of the 1500s, it is just really annoying. And then the thing doesn't work because the MTU size is just like a different number, and you're like, damn it. And the 15 numbers, they're all over the place.
Yeah.
But they're
Okay.
always definitely below 1600. And then the next question is, oh, are those jumbo frames?
Hi, Vladimir Vasiliev, Transpacket. I would like to add to this discussion a maybe we should also add pockets in and pockets out counter, because this we don't have. We have unicast and multicast pockets, and for various reasons, a lot of hardware just don't implement differentiation between unicast and multicast pockets. So you really, the IETF interfaces model is impossible to implement on those devices. There are many devices like OpenFlow, for example, devices. You cannot implement the interfaces model for OpenFlow devices. You cannot implement it for unrestricted traffic generators. And these are supposed to be flexible devices that you actually should not have any problem implementing the IT interfaces. And I think I am against adding Ethernet-specific counters in this draft. Maybe there should be another draft that should add them, but this one should be kept as compact as possible. I think now it's too large already.
Okay.
Yeah.
So to answer your question about the total packet counts in and out, I could be mistaken. I have a feeling that went into the 802.3.2. I think they might have a total packet in and out. So either that count, I think, should be neither in IETF interfaces or it should be in 802.3.2. You give me a look of that's not the case, but I'll double check. But that's no more questions on that or comments. So, yeah, go on. No, it's the same thing. So
When you're done with Instagram, I think it would be good to make sure we have a good understanding of what the room thinks.
yes,
So,
yeah.
I mean, you're welcome to leave those questions. And, you know, like at the end of your histogram discussion.
Well, I think we are at the end of these. I think now's the time to ask the questions. So the questions you want to ask effectively is, who do we try and do this now? Or do we defer? Is that the fair question?
That's the high order.
You want a hum or poll hand? You prefer hum.
I can't distinguish hums, so I like hands.
So who thinks we should delay this and add these histogram counters in now, which could be contentious? Who thinks I should do this now?
So adding the counters now, if you think it's a good idea, please raise your hand. Adding the histogram counters. Should we do that now? I've seen two hands go up and down. No one is holding their hands up. So very, very few for the minutes. How many think we should not add now? It's not a big number, but it's clearly more. Percentage-wise, it's huge, but it's not a huge number.
And
So I think the sentiment of the room is to delay. From my standpoint as chair, given the level of discussion we're having, what's that? Yeah. So
yeah, that's what it's doing.
As chair and actually shepherd, my view is this seems like a little contentious to add now.
Mhm.
If it was important to add it, we certainly should. But I don't think it's critical.
Yeah, that's
And
fine.
I'm specifically stating the opinion now because I'd like to hear if anyone in the working group disagrees with that opinion. So I think we're going to leave this meeting where we're not going to add the histogram counters, including any of them, like including the ones we showed them. So these are not going to show up in the document. So if you disagree with that, now's the time to talk. All right.
And can I ask one more question, which is, who thinks that we should try and standardize, if we don't do it now, as a separate draft or separate work item, to try and standardize this, add these counters in, or something like it?
Joe Clark Cisco, clarifying question. Do you mean standardize at the upper levels or just standardize on these buckets below 1520?
I mean these and the upper levels as well, covering the whole range.
Okay, I think you should then. at the upper
Joe,
levels. Yeah.
clarifying question. You said at the upper levels.
Sorry.
Upper levels mean above Ethernet?
Yeah, sorry, I mean, sorry.
Bigger frame
Sorry, yeah,
sizes.
higher numbers, higher frame sizes, sorry, yes, higher frame sizes.
I think this should be standardized because for the performance measurement and troubleshooting across a service topology, having that information to be uniform and be able to calculate the histogram at the service level effort, is very helpful when you're trying to debug and troubleshoot for automation.
Okay. So I propose that I try and email David Law and say we're thinking about doing this. What does he think? Is that?
That'd be great.
And then we'll go back from there. Okay. The MTU issue, which I hope will be easier, although MTU is always a contentious thing. So there's a Netmod thread titled "Question regarding RRC 8344," and basically the premise of what came up there is I think that the Linux default loopback MTU is 65536 bytes long, whereas all the MTUs in the IETF models are limited to uint 16 and hence 65535. Somebody pointed out that an IP layer having MTU above 65535 is not allowed anyway. This model does define an L2 MTU, so it defines an MTU across those protocols and is currently defined as a uint 16. The question is, should we change this to uint 32 instead, specifically to cover this Linux loopback MTU case? Any thoughts on that, opinions?
Yeah, definitely, because different interfaces, if you take out Ethernet, they have bigger number. It's not only the walkaway interface. There are other interfaces as well that
go
bigger
above
ones.
this.
Yeah.
You can also set it to a megabyte, right? So like this actually helps us solve that problem.
Okay.
So when someone else does it, it's already solved.
Brilliant. Okay, so assuming nobody's against this, then I'll just switch that to uint 32. That's the last one. So any other comments on the interface extensions Yang model?
In that mail that actually brought up that, it was my mail to the group, and there was, in the end, there was another suggestion. In addition to the L2 MTU, I think it makes sense to have MTU, which is the MTU definition actually used by Linux. Like when you use the IF interfaces configuration in Linux, what you get is actually the MTU without the header, L2 header, and that's very important for most people who use Linux. They are used to that value. So this has to be in the model, I think. And there is advantage when you define protocol configuration based on the IT interfaces. You want to know the packet payload you can use. So when you configure parameters, you can when you're configuring other MTUs of other protocols, you can put a must statement there limiting the size of that MTU to that MTU. So this makes a lot of sense to have it there. And it's more elegant to have just interface MTU, kind of elegant, L2 MTU, and especially the limitation of taking out the V1 in the description statement creates complications because you have the mux that actually just don't care about if it's a V1 added or not. The MTU is the same register value. So if you standardize this in the Yang model, it will be difficult to implement it. Like you want to have a filter, not sending packets bigger than that size in hardware. And you have this difference that a V1 added should not be a problem and should go through. You cannot do it with the existing hardware. That's another point I have about this. So a general MTU that corresponds to the Linux definition of MTU, I think it's something that I propose.
Vladimir, can you remind me your last name?
Vasilev.
Vasilev.
So I'm nervous about that for several reasons. One is that I think losing the L2 MTU configuration value is probably a mistake. I think there's lots of systems that use that as the configurable value on an interface. So I think changing that to an L3 MTU, so payload MTU, as you say, would be probably a poor choice. I think then the question is, could you have both of them coexisting? But that would also, you could probably allow either of the two to be configured potentially, but I'm not sure how the constraints would work. So if your constraint was against a payload-based MTU, but the user configured an L2 MTU, then it wouldn't necessarily work. I could certainly see how you could report both values in the operational state to say, this is the full frame MTU, and this is what the payload, L2 payload MTU is. That would be more feasible.
Well, my argument is that the payload MTU is what all the RFCs up to now in the IETF are using.
Yeah.
So it is strange that we are not going to have that MTU as part of that. Instead, we are going to use L2 MTU, which actually you can derive from the type of the interface. If the interface is Ethernet, there is no doubt what is the difference between the MTU and the L2 MTU. So why are we going to bound ourselves to the interfaces, and the interface type is not going to be used as information source for that calculation? It is going to create confusion, as on this mailing list, like this person was trying to configure MTU for the payload MTU, and he was confused that he could not do that. This will add confusion. You're adding another MTU, which means something different from everything else. That's.
But again, it goes back to what the hardware will police, and often the hardware framers and things might police a single value, and the value that they're policing is the L2 frame size, not necessarily the IP or the L3 and the L2 payload. So that's one complexity. And in terms of the same discussions about historically, IETF standardized the L3 MTU. They did do that. They did that for L2 VPN, and they've ended up in a world of pain because of it. So in the L2 VPN specs, the MTU negotiated across the wire is the payload MTU, but you don't know what size those headers are, so you can't easily agree that value. It's very hard to calculate when you've got an L2 frame coming in to say, well, this amount of its headers, without having to analyze the pack. You don't know how many tags are on there. So it's a very strange value to use. So I'm still nervous of moving something that's doing an L2 check to be using an L3 value as the configuration value. I do get the Linux thing that's unusual, but it might be that that's a mistake in Linux for using that choice.
Okay.
So I always struggle with the term L2 MTU.
Okay.
And I don't believe those are the terms used in the IEEE. And the question is better to use the same term that the IEEE used, which I believe says that is maximum frame size. And to distinguish the maximum frame size from the IP MTU. I mean, typically, in the original definition of MTU, and I know people are using it loosely,
yeah,
but I'm not convinced we should be perpetuating that. MTU is the maximum size of the IP packet. That's the definition of MTU in its initial form.
I don't know.
That's where, I mean, if you find first usage of it, that's my memory. I could be wrong, but that's my memory. It's the maximum IP size. And the use here, we're in the document is saying L2 MTU. You're including the L2 headers, and I think that's more max. Again, going to the Ethernet terminology, max frame size, and it may be helpful. I don't know. Well, it seems to me it may be helpful to use that term rather than use L2.
I can look at what's in 82.3 as well, but I mean MTU is very standardly used, and it does mean different things in different places.
Yeah, I mean, if you say Ethernet datagram, for example, it's pretty unambiguous what that is, right? Whereas Ethernet MTU,
right?
Or frame MTU. But I think moving away from MTU is going to cause confusion to people because.
well, I mean, I think it has the potential to do it both ways. Since we do it already and it does, I think it's whatever we decide, it should be either no worse than what we do now or less ambiguous.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to see if there is any RFC anywhere that says L2 MTU. I was going to do a quick grab, but I wasn't fast enough.
The LTV one should, but it doesn't.
My observation as an operator, and maybe things have changed over the last couple of years where I haven't cared about interface configuration. Actually, the MTU thing is very confused. We have then, well, okay, in the configuration languages, it shows up as far as I remember. And there are vendors that have different interpretations between vendors. There are vendors that have different interpretations depending on the line of operating system running on the hardware. And then my observation is that the usual configuration, as I remember it, is kind of, well, okay, a rough estimate anyway, because I don't think I ever had an MTU configuration that was actually precise for limiting my MPLS label headers. So I would see two questions, which concept is the model to address? Certainly the previous question, should the concept being addressed here, be it a precise one or mirroring the existing situation that, well, okay, we only give a rough number and let the ops people someday perhaps figure out that, yes, there is one MPLS label too many.
So there's different ways different people implement this. On some OSs, as you say, you give it an L3 or an L2 payload MTU, and then they add on some slop and then say anything that's between this is fine. And then there's other ones that have a value that's like this L2 calculated, and they will check that strictly. So any frames above that size, they'll drop it as an egress drop. And there's different approaches. And as you say, different vendors do it different ways, and different OSs between the same vendors can do it different ways.
Probably a precise layer 2 is the one thing that is conceptually easy. It's going to backfire when it's going to be run out in the configuration languages and into ops.
Okay.
So I did a quick grab, and it looks like there's two RFCs, both from the same basically set of authors in the last year or so in that space that you talked about, that you use the layer 2 MTU context. I think for something that's so general, we should not introduce it here, but stick with, figure out whether the previous RFCs, and I'll do it right there too, have used maximum frame size. I think that's probably the safer term. And I'm not going to say that we're going to clarify, we're going to clean up the confusion, because I think but we won't make it worse.
Yes, I think that's...
I think by using the term layer 2 MTU, that's horribly confusing.
Okay.
And I'm sorry to see that one group has adopted that, and maybe we'll torpedo them somehow, or at least they could provide some feedback to them.
Okay. So that was all the questions I had on that. The subinterface VLAN Yang data models, this is also in working group last call. This one is much shorter in terms of what I've said. 2 reviews, support publication, and no comments received. As I say, possibly that means the document's flawless. But otherwise, if you are interested, it'd be useful to have a review. Even if you're happy with how it stands now, as part of this working group last call process. I don't know when the working group last call's meant to finish, but we need more reviews.
So I think it actually finished on Friday. But that said, as Shepherd, I'm not going to be able to look at this until at least next week. They technically, while the comments are closed, you still have some comments that need addressing before we'll be ready to go. And there's going to be an IETF last call that people can submit comments to. So rather than to be really strict about it, I'd say if you have comments, it's not too late to send them. I will send out the formal last call being closed when I have time to start processing it after the IETF. Hopefully we won't get comments after that, but if it's a good comment, whenever it shows up, we should try to address it.
Yep.
I'll say it again, there's an opportunity because we do expect at least one update to one of the documents.
Yes.
Before we can move it forward. So we encourage anyone in the working group who has not recently read these documents to do so. And if you have comments, please send them to us.
That's password.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, Blush.
By the way, I did a grep on max frame size. It shows up in a lot of documents. Google grep. No, Google this grep.
Okay. Balázs Lengyel from Ericsson. This has been a new edition of this Yang instance data draft. Doesn't seem to stay.
Just say next.
Yes. No. Okay. Second. So the concept was that we have many use cases where we want to document instance data, so not the models themselves, but the actual values, that integer strings. And we want to document them offline and potentially hand them out to customers or store them somewhere. These are just some of the use cases. I think there are 7 or 8. Some of them are detailed in the document. And it was decided that at least we will need some metadata about the instance data. So when was it produced? What models are documenting? Some administrative data like a name, a description, and stuff. And we at least need 2 formats, XML and JSON. Next. So the draft was updated. It received quite a number of comments close to the last IETF. Earlier, the modules that defined the content were called the target modules. Number of people didn't like that, so now it's called content schema, and 1 or 2 cases where I have to refer to the individual modules is then it's called content defining Yang modules. Change terminology and changed wherever that came up inside the draft. Some people, the Yang instance data set itself has a name, which most of the times I think is needed. Some people insisted that they don't always want to have that, so it became optional. There were some this draft is using the Yang data or Yang structure as it's now called. It was updated according to that draft, including Yang trees and all that. And there was a comment that entity tags and last modified timestamps that are quite useful in REST-conf are actually encoded in HTTP headers, and we can't use HTTP headers in these 2 formats, so now they are defined as metadata, and if they are used, they can be encoded as metadata. And next. So this is an example of an updated instance data set. Few things are missing, like an XML header, because they didn't fit on the slide. Yep, they are included in the examples in the draft, but not here. So here we have,
I don't come. May I ask
concerning the previous slide about this entity tag and last modified. Does it mean that if you have a content schema, this content schema has to have some modules that define these annotations, or?
No, the IETF instance data Yang module defines these annotations.
Because I can see, of course, a good use for many other annotations that are already available or that may be defined in the future. So I don't really see any need for, because as you said, currently this entity tag and last modified are used by the RESTconf server as a part of HTTP headers. So I don't know if somebody wants to define it as an annotation, that's fine. But in this case, this can be the same for any other annotation. So I would suggest really to require in this case to have some module defining entity tags and last modified as annotations, and then you can use it normally in the content schema and use in the data.
I think they are quite useful bits of information, and they're just doing a module to define these two tags when clearly we use them here. I don't see the reason to split them out, so they won't harm anyone. They are obviously useful in my view. I didn't want to define them because I thought RESTconf handles that, but as we can't use the RESTconf encoding solution, I like them, but it's very easy to remove them, but I like them.
Again, are there any supporters of this this formulation in the draft currently? So is there any reason why to handle these two annotations in a specific way?
Because these are well-defined bits of data, and they are quite basic information for the content.
Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. I can argue the same way about the origin annotation, for example.
It's mentioned, actually. And the origin annotation, I think, is defined somewhere else, so I don't need to redefine it.
But
can we ask that room? Or
Kent, as a contributor, Lado, what are you saying? You think that the instant file should not have timestamp or entity last modified?
No, what I'm saying is that we should treat these two or other annotations in the same way, and the proper way and neutral way is to define a Yang module that defines these annotations and include it as part of the content schema for this instance data. That's then normally published either inline or in any other way, but it's done just in a normal standard way rather than mentioning it specifically in this document.
So if I understand correct, Bludge, that it would be an annotation, right?
Yes.
So it's just a question of whether or not it's defined in this module or a separate module. Is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying is that I would define a module that defines these two metadata annotations, entity tag and last modified, for example, as a separate module, and then I would include this module in every content schema for the data where these two annotations are of any use, of course. If I have instant data that have no use of this last modified, probably I would avoid having this module in the schema.
Do you see other uses for these annotations, specifically these two beside the IETF instance data?
Are you asking about other annotations?
No, for these two annotations, are you foreseeing any other use?
I don't know. It could be possibly used in Netconf, for example.
For me, it's easy to remove it.
So you mean to remove it altogether? It's not important to the draft?
It's not critical for me as an author that we have these We have these annotations in the Yang file. I am
Yeah,
not willing at this point to start a new draft to do this.
Of course, it's not critical for me either, but I think it's a bit.
So I may have misinterpreted.
Yeah.
But when I read it as being sort of paralleling what the metadata you get from the netcomp protocol or RESTcomp protocol. And so you were trying to add a parallel piece of information where, we don't have a protocol on the wire, we have a format, right? So it was parallel to that. At least that's what I was thinking when I read it, which is quite different from where Lada is going, where it becomes part of the content. What was sort of your intent? Were you thinking more as content, more as metadata? Is the parallel that
I think it's
thinking was just completely off base and I was reading too much into it?
It's a parallel what we have in RESTconf.
Right. So from my standpoint, it sort of seemed like it made sense to do it that way. But I also agree with both of you. It's not a critical item. It seemed like it would be useful. Could be useful.
My understanding was that these annotations could be just attached to any instance node in the data in any way, right? So maybe
We are quite. I want to be liberal. What can be here? So if you want other annotations, they find wherever. Yes, that's also possible.
Yeah, of course, that was my understanding. I can have any Yang modules being part of the content schema. So why not any other annotations?
And as a contributor, I think a lot of what you're saying is in RESTconf, the top level node must have an E tag and if modified tags. Inner nodes may have them. And so to your point, any node may have them. And so there's that. But then separately, there's a question of why do we need to have this information in the instance file format? Like who would consume it? What would be the use case behind that they would want to be consuming this data? I think we should have that discussion on the list, and then we'll conclude whether or not it's important to define them now or later.
I don't know actually who could use it. I think it's useful information. Yeah, the use cases doesn't cover these tags at this point.
But my point is that we needn't really care about use cases for these two annotations. If somebody does have a use for them, they can define this module defining the annotations and just go ahead and use them. So that's fine. But it needn't be an issue for this document because it can accommodate any annotations whatsoever.
Yeah. It's really, the question is really that, is it reasonable to have them defined here, or will lead it to some later point, if that ever happens?
So how many people have an opinion on this topic at all? So we have that's interesting, very, very small number. How many like the approach in the draft right now? Interesting, we see a few hands that were not raised before. So I'm really confused by that, but I accept that there's just a few.
Robert, I'm not sure how important this data is. So that's the point of view that I don't really care that much either way. At the moment, it just seems to be one sentence in the draft saying that these are done the same way as RESTconf, which is fairly minimal text. I do get Lada's point about if we're going to do it, why don't we do it generically? But I still also see you could have this line in the draft saying this is how they're done, and it would still be done generically for anything else. Oh, and even these. I mean, it's.
So that's the next question: is how many think we should do this as part of the data model itself that gets stored with the file? So rather than metadata, but as its own model. I'll say it's less than the first one. None of these are statistically significant numbers. But still, it seems like there is a very, very slight preference of room to stay as it is. I would say let's keep it, but also ask again on the list if people have any comments on this. So I'm just looking down to see if there's anything from Jabber? Or Jurgen's? You want to channel him? I can channel him.
You can channel.
All right. Jurgen says, I rather have generic support for annotations and have doubts that exposing HTTP internal metadata is terribly useful. Ideally, the instance format is protocol agnostic. Okay, so to me, he just said two things that are counter to each other, but
I don't think that, let's say, the last modified tag is HTTP specific. That's data store specific and data specific.
yeah, I actually agree with you. That's why I thought it was counter. So I think it would be good to confirm keeping it as is in the document on the list. I think we should do that. I'd ask you or ask the authors.
I'll put out the question.
Put out the question. Yeah.
Next, please. Okay, so here is an example, somewhat shortened example of how this would look like. The most interesting part here is that we have some metadata like the name, revision, description. Description means the description of the instance data set, and then we have the specification of the content schema. Here we have an example where the content schema is specified in line. First, the Yang library is used to say that the Yang library module format will be used to specify the content schema, and then inline content schema really specifies that it's the netconf ACM module that we are handling. And next one, please. This looks somewhat terrible. It was nicer originally. So this is the content data. That's the real thing that we want to communicate. Yeah, you can. I don't know what happened with the slides. Anyway, can you skip back one more? Can you skip back? Okay, so never mind. Here we have this inline content schema definition. There's also a possibility to just put a reference to the content schema if you don't want to repeat it. In the case that you have, I don't know, diagnostics data every 5 seconds, then you don't want the content schema repeated every time. And that's it. And I think I would like to bring this to work group last calls, but I would like.
Well, we just discussed the need to have to bring some things to the list.
Can we have that one question, one non-critical question, as we agreed with Lada as part of the last call?
It seems like we're going to arrive there pretty quickly. Like we should, I think, after we pose that question, be able to commence this after the meeting.
Why don't I actually have another question regarding this inline specification? Yes. This seems you are now using the new Yang library, but I think that the idea is not to define like data stores and things like that, that you only really need this module set.
Yes.
So does it mean that you can use other parts of the Yang library here, or is it really restricted to this module set specification?
You can use the Yang library in the content part, and here you could have parts for deviations and for features. I didn't actually put in text saying that you should not have text about, I don't know, data store lists, but they are kind of meaningless unless the data stores can be meaningful if you specify which data store you are putting it. Which parts of the Yang library are you thinking about?
One question is whether we really need to have this flexibility of specifying different Yang library revisions or even different ways of doing that, because possibly we could use the old Yang library everywhere, and this would do probably for this purpose pretty well. So
agree with you, except that in the last round I got an explicit statement that I must use the new Yang library, and even that it should be possible to use something else beside the Yang library. So I was specifically asked for being flexible. One more thing that's not visible in this example, that here in the inline spec, you might have other modules. One thing that immediately comes to mind is the Yang versioning, where you could, which augments the Yang library with version label. That could be useful here. But I was asked to put in the flexibility, and yeah, it doesn't disturb.
It seems to add a lot of complexity, as you just said, and in my opinion, I'm not sure if it's really worth this complexity.
On the mailing list, there was I don't know. So I agree that it's not, the complexity is a bit too much, but I was explicitly asked in the mailing list by Jürgen and maybe some others that we should have this flexibility.
Maybe you can find that thread in the mailing list and reply to it, raising the issue that Lada brought this up. And yeah, okay, maybe Lada can find that.
I think it will end up with, yes, I want it, yes, I don't want it.
Rob Wilson, Cisco. So I think almost having three choices is what I prefer. One is a very simple one, which is just, this is the list of the modules and their revisions, and that defines the schema. So without even needing the inline content schema, just that list is one choice. The second one is what you've done here, where you specify what the schema is in that way. And the third one is a remote schema. I just see that here, if you just want to return the data for one or two Yang modules, listing them in line with having less metadata boilerplate at the top of the file is probably beneficial. But it depends who you intend to read these.
I don't agree with your first method, sorry, because this is a simple case. You need to have a place for features, supported features. You need to have a place for deviations. And you also need to at least specify which version of the Yang library you are using, or which, let's say you say that you just want a list about this thing.
Yeah.
You want to say who defines or what defines the format of that list. So, easiest way is we already have one in Yang library, why define a new one? But then you might have multiple versions of that. So you need to that.
So I'm not saying take away what you have here. I'm saying add another third option that's a simpler version of it that doesn't worry about deviations, doesn't worry about features. Because it's just the data that you're uploading. You could potentially just have the features enabled by default.
I think deviations and features are very, I think they are needed.
Well, you can still express them using this format. It's just having, my question really is, for some files, if you have this boilerplate at the top of every file, is that a good thing or not? Is it that actually this is just noise? And for the vast majority of cases that if you're just returning a couple of modules there, you're doing it quite verbose way.
You might gain, I don't know, 5 lines, but with the complexity that you have, add some more modules, and then if you have deviations or features, then you had to come back to this one. So yeah, you could add more, but I don't think it's needed.
Just for the record, I also think the new Vladimir. I also think the new Yang library is overly complex for the purpose of creating an instance data file. And you sound like you were told on the list. I think no one actually thinks that an instance data file should contain multiple stores. I would rather have multiple files containing multiple data stores. So it's more like atomic, and it's not overly complex. But this discussion against having it done this way, there was a discussion, and more people should have contributed to keeping a simple single data store Yang library. Now we have a new Yang library which is obsoleting the simple uni-data store one. So it's very difficult if we are going to use the old one to make new RFCs. It is going to create even more confusion. So I regret not having more support when there was a discussion that we should keep the same Yang library and use different mechanisms to achieve the goal it does. Then it was only me and maybe Andy Bierman who was opposing. And everyone was complacent to that. So now we just have to use the new Yang library, I guess.
I don't think, while I would have loved to have a more simple solution, I don't think these 5 lines are worth discussing.
One question, what Rob said previously, in my opinion, if Rob writes a module, let's say IETF Yang module list, and then inserts this module into this inline spec, then this simple list of modules without deviations could be possibly used, given this flexibility that you have here, right? So.
You still need at least the revision. Yeah, we could add the 3rd method if that's.
So
Yeah.
yes, I've
Or
written such a
4th
draft.
actually.
I've written such a draft that's called IETF Yang packages.
We could add the 4th method because there's always the method that the receiver knows what is the content schema due to some offline method or some implementation specific method, which I think will be quite common as well. But if you want, we can add a 4th method that. Yeah.
So it seems like we have 2 issues to resolve before going to last call.
I would just like to ask the chairs to get to some decision on these because none of them are critical and we are going back and forth, and please help me to get a decision.
Shin? Press this button here.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Qing. I'm here to discuss factory default setting. Yeah, next. So what is this draft about? Actually, this draft actually define a new RPC we call the factory reset RPC, and we also introduce a new factory default data store. It is read-only data store and optional data store. Actually, we typical use cases we use this factory default settings. We can use this in the zero-touch configuration stage. Also, in some cases, you may actually have major error on the configuration. You can use it, leverage this reset factory reset RPC to reset the device to the default state. So the current status, actually, this draft actually we have 2 coupled options for this draft, and we resolve some issue. Actually, I think so the change we made actually in this draft actually in a version 0.1 version, actually main issue is about terminology. The Yang server we define, people have some concerns, so we actually try to reuse the existing terminology like a server defined in the NMB architecture. The second major change actually is about how this factory reset apply to the data store. Actually, we can apply all the data store, but people have some concern. Maybe we should take out the candidate. So we add some text to clarify this. And so in second for adoption, actually we also raise some of issues. And in version 0.2, actually there's 2 issues we try to resolve. One is the security issues, and we make some proposals, and so we will discuss this as an open issue. Another one is about copy config. Actually, this is we actually extended the copy config operation to support factory default setting, but it's not factory default setting specific. So the result is we remove this copy config actually. So so this just reflects the discussion on the mailing list that we already remove this copy config. And as I mentioned, actually this is not a factory default specific. So also we actually revisit several NMDA protocol like Netconf NMDA and RESTconf NMDA support. Actually, it doesn't define the copy config like RPC actually. So, but it will be useful to have a getter config because we have a factory default data store. So it will be useful to have the get config to allow get config to get access to this data store. So based on the mailing list discussion, we actually remove the copy config extension from the module in the draft. Actually, we defer this to the Netconf next to address this. So the second issue is about the security issue. And because for the factory reset RPC is many focus actually to reset the device to the factory default state, but also it will be useful, to use this RPC to clean up the file, restart the node, some of the software process, or you also can set the security password or data to the default values, but all of this information may be sensitive, so we need to address the security issue. There's a relevant discussion in the Netconf mailing list related to the key store draft actually, but we think, the factory default set data store could be useful for the key store draft, but we try to resolve this kind of issue. So the proposal, we propose some text. We can use some encryption or sign mechanism. Also, talk with our colleagues. We think maybe we should, rely on the access control rule to protect the sensitive data. So that's what we have, but we are not a security experts. We want to hear if any additional input for this part.
Joe Clark, Cisco. Any input on any of these bullets or just the last one?
Last one.
Okay, I don't have an input on the last one, but I really don't like bullet number 2.
Okay.
The way it's defined in the draft, I could have my device reboot if I set this RPC. That as an opera, it feels squishy. I would rather these things be more atomic. Like I use the RPC to reset the config, and then I might send another RPC to reboot the device.
If you reset the config, how are you going to send the RPC to reboot the device?
Yeah. Okay, let me restate. I would rather there be some more definition around this so that I know what is necessarily going to happen. And it might be that I only want to factory reset the startup and then send an RPC to reboot the device as an example.
Balázs Lengyel Eriksson, as a co-author, about the last point that factory default might contain security data. I think that's actually not a question about the factory default data store, because the same data will be available in running after reset. So it's the responsibility of the data model to somehow protect these security critical items. And that mechanism should be the same in running and factory default data store. So I don't see why this is a specific problem to this draft.
Kent, as a contributor and also author of the key store draft where this is being discussed, so the actual data lives in operational, but it would need to be promoted to configuration in order to be referenced by configuration. And of course, if it's being shipped from manufacturing, it'd be ideal for it to be in the factory default data store Or, I mean, perhaps startup, but perhaps the problem with startup is it can be deleted thereafter. I mean, it could be a choice, one or the other. It'd be a convenience. It's not a security issue though, because the data would, if it's hidden, so that's not a
Yeah.
security issue. And if it's encrypted, it's encrypted, that's not a security issue.
Okay.
So it's not a security issue per se.
Okay.
Tim Carey, Nokia. So 2 points. One is kind of agree with the last speaker of the fact that, the factory default, I don't understand the security issue because I would understand that when we reset something to factory default, the factory information is going to be used to populate the startup, right? That's effectively what's happening. To the other question about the options and other protocols that we've done this with, and we've done factory resets for CPEs for, going on 20 years now, right? In a standard way, we actually allow for the other things that you're talking about, cleaning up files or restarting the node, particularly restarting the node, is simply being options that go into the RPC. So you just simply say, hey, look, I'm going to do a factory reset. By the way, restart this thing when you're done.
To answer the question, Tim, to answer your question of why is it a security issue, I think something that's a little different here is this could be done completely remotely. And in many of the factory reset options that I got about in equipment, you have to do it locally. You can't do it over your network management. I mean, there's some that do allow network management, but there's some systems that don't.
Okay.
And there's definitely security implications of allowing you remote access to reset a device, a network device.
Sure. So even when you reset the network device, factory reset, again, we've done this for billions, right? So it's not like this is new, right? So the information that's put in the manufacturing store, right, is then used.
I'm saying that the RPC itself is a security risk.
Oh, certainly. Okay, I'm sorry. Yes.
Yeah, thanks.
Dejan Bogdanovic, TPM and the trusted computing, they are solving those problems. And I know many hardware vendors are putting TPM modules inside their hardware. So that helps, solve some of those problems.
So Kent is a contributor, and again, this goes to the key store draft and the NetConf working group. Indeed, that isn't where we're expecting the TPMs would be used to protect the keys shipped from manufacturing. That's exactly what was discussed in this morning's presentation. Okay.
Rob Wilson, Cisco, I was just going to add for the RPCs, if there's security concerns with that, surely NACAM would just cover appropriate access controls of a factory reset RPC. So I don't think there's anything particularly different there.
I don't have a response to you. I just have another addition that's in the mic queue behind you. Andy said, I agree that the system restart RPC and IETF system Yang should be augmented instead of a new RPC that requires 2 steps.
For system restart, actually, this is something we already discussed. Actually, I think the purposes are different. I'm not sure whether we should do the augment from the system restart.
Right. I'm not actually disagreeing with you. I'm just channeling.
Okay.
On the chat.
Rob Wilson, Cisco. So I liked what Tim said. I think that made a lot of sense to me, that you just have an option to say also wipe files and another option that says restart the device. If that seems fairly easy, just to find that if you don't specify that, the device isn't restarted.
Okay, I think that's. I think probably we will resolve some issue, and probably we should ask her to move to the next step.
next I think we have Alice Clem, right? Remote presentation. Oh. So he'll be on remote. Okay, good. Yeah, so just a second.
Alex, can we hear you? Say something?
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, you sound great.
Okay, excellent. Okay, yeah, so this is just a quick update on the comparison of NMDA data stores. Also on behalf of the co-authors and so forth. So again, a reminder, this basically the center of this draft is an RPC that allows to compare NMDA data stores, where basically the idea is that you can this provides a view to report on the differences between data stores without needing to upload the entire thing and compare them offline. Applications of this for this are to, for instance, troubleshoot conditions which are due to unexpected failures, sync issues between data stores, lagging change propagation, and so forth. So we did post a few new revisions. The current revision is 0.2. The main changes that were applied are, on one hand, basically the Yang patch format to report differences was updated to add a source, to add basically a new item, source value, that shows the values on both sides of the comparison. The comment that had been made before was basically that earlier basically we showed, well, there's a source and there's a target, and the comparison is done in terms of a patch that would be applied to the source to reach the target, but that would not tell the value on both on both sides. When, for instance, the value is replaced, you would then only know basically the value of one of the data source and know that it would be different in the other one, but not which one it is. So basically, that is the thing that has been that has been added. This is probably the most important change. Then, in addition, we added a more extended example that shows the results of a difference comparison, and we also updated and extended the security considerations. Next slide, please. So this is just basically a snippet of the main difference, or of the new portion in the Yang data model that has the differences format. So basically, what you see here is that the Yang patch is basically the Yang patch added is augmented to include a new source value, which is basically any data value that that basically indicates the value of the source data item that is being replaced, and which applies basically whenever you're deleting something from the source or from the left side of the comparison. If you're merging it, moving it, replacing it, or removing it, it is there. It's obviously not there if there's a create, because then basically that value did not exist earlier. Next one, next slide. And this already brings me to the last slide, basically to the discussion items. Basically, a couple of items basically to confirm here or to discuss with the group. One thing, first thing concerns this patch format, which has been now newly proposed here. So basically, this augmentation, we do believe, actually addresses the requirement to show the values of both sides of the comparison. The earlier request was also basically that we should not allow for different formats, so we should basically agree and settle on one to help interoperability. So the question is basically if that is the format that we should go forward with. Other formats are possible, but we just need to settle on one. So basically there's the question basically in the room, if you will, basically if there's, for instance, another proposal for another canonical DIP format. So if there are other formats, we would like to hear about them so we can make the choice. Otherwise, basically the proposal is what's been presented. So that's the first aspect, the first item. Second discussion item concerned the metadata of the origin of a data item. So basically the idea was if an operational data store is used as a comparison target, then the
that it would be useful to indicate what the origin of the data was, right? So that you, for instance, if the assumption is that that it came from intended, yet it comes from the original system, that, for instance, might offer explanations, for instance, why data is different. So this might be useful in troubleshooting. But one question was basically whether it should be always included, or if we should have a knob, or whether a knob should be added, whether or not to actually include it or to omit it. So currently we do not have such a knob. Basically, this would the more knobs you add, the more complexity you add. The opinion here is that is probably just to include it, best to include it by default. But again, that is something that we should confirm here. Also, Andy, who I think is online, actually raised another issue, but he had another item that he wanted to discuss with regards to the origin matter. This concerned basically the actual format. Actually, I'll probably let him speak for himself, but it is related to that same item. Then the third item is an item that has been open for a while. It is also listed in the draft. Currently, the comparison filter is defined using subtree and XPath as per netconf. And the question is basically whether there would be a requirement to also allow for definition of filters relating to target resources per RESTconf. And then the final item is an item that was just brought up recently by Tim on the list concerning potentially adding a performance consideration section. The performance consideration are in a way implied in the security section. This concerns that basically that there is potentially a hit that is done on the system that is doing the comparison, and the request is to add a section which just makes this more explicit, which we can add, but which has currently not been added to this current revision yet. And that concludes what I have. So maybe we can go through these items and get opinions in the room.
Alex, can you hear me? Alex, can you hear me?
Yes, very low. Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. So I was trying to, this is Kent, Chair currently. I was trying to interrupt you as you're presenting so we could ask the room case by case, but we'll have to run the items as, we'll still do one at a time, but we may have to ask you to repeat and reload the contracts as you go through them.
Yeah. Much louder, by the way. Your voice was very low earlier. This is why I couldn't hear you. Sorry.
There may be a question at the mic. Is this regarding the first item?
Rob Wilson's just going, no, but I also have one other question that's not related to these at all, so maybe I can raise that one now.
Okay, go ahead.
So, Alex, looking at the draft, I'm still not entirely sure the diff is doing quite what I would look for. So you have the all option that can be turned on or off, and if the all option is off, you compare nodes that exist in both data stores, so intended and operational. Is that right?
Yes.
And only if it exists in both do you compare the value. And if the all option's on, it says at the moment you would do a diff against the full contents of both data stores. So I think that would mean in operational you get all the data back, so all the operational state back. Or would you still apply a filter so it only config true items would come back?
Oh, no. The idea is, of course, that well, first of all, that you would only basically report differences back, right? So
yes.
Okay.
Yes, but if you consider compared running or intended to operational, all the config false data in operational is guaranteed to be different from running because it doesn't exist in running. So all your statistics, for example, all that data will never ever be in running because it's never going to be there. Would you automatically exclude that?
We would, no, we would not automatically exclude that. So it is basically, the question is basically what you would request as a user, and this is essentially, that is essentially up to the user or up to the client to specify what it wants to have compared.
So I think that all option is going to, if you compared any configuration data store to operational, is going to give you back a lot more data than you're interested in, because it will give you back all operational data as well as the applied configuration.
Okay.
I'd be interested in an option that just effectively compares the config true nodes in operational against what's in running or intended, but has all of those, even if they only exist in one or the other. So I want to see configuration items that are in running but haven't yet been applied. So maybe the line card's missing. And conversely, I'd also like to see configuration that I've removed from running, but still persists on the system due to some issue or some error that for some reason my BGP peer configuration hasn't been deleted. I would like to see that. So I'd like an option that filters the config true part of operational against what's in intended or running if possible.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
So right now it is basically, okay, so right now basically it would be, well, okay, the way it is defined right now is that, okay, so basically you're saying we need to have something between these two options, right? Because right now we have either you include everything, or you include or you exclude data from the comparison that does not pertain to both. But you're saying that you would want to have it restricted a little bit further, so a third option.
Yeah, between the two. I question how useful the all option will be if you're ever comparing operational to a configuration data store. I think that because of the amount of data that will come back, by and large, that's probably not what's been looked for.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you also have a filter spec that you specify as well. So, so when you say that all differences are returned, that would be only basically if your filter spec is empty, or if you're asking to compare the entire tree, which in general might, however, not be the case. Right? I mean, of course, if you do this, then it's true. Everything will come back, but typically you would have a filter spec as well.
But if you consider, for example, say you're checking the configuration for one interface, then you might have 3 or 4 lines of interface configuration, and then in operational you'd have that plus hundreds of counters and other operational data, and that would automatically always be returned because that'll never ever be in intended or running. So it'll always be reported as a difference if you specified your all option. But I'm not sure what...
That is true, if you specify the all option.
But my question is, when is that useful? When does anyone actually really need that case? Is it a useful case where that's useful data to return?
Okay, I cannot give you an answer right now. I mean, it's clearly something that we could control. I mean, I guess that is the. So I think you're asking, should we remove this all option or just include another option basically instead?
Yes, that's my question.
Okay, so I don't have a strong opinion on the all right now. I do think definitely having the option to exclude it like it is here, that one certainly is important. If you want to have everything, yeah, I'm okay. I don't have a use case actually right now at the top of my head for this, so this is maybe a question to ask the room.
Rob Shakir, Google. The only data point I can add is we didn't implement the all option when we implemented this. Like, we didn't implement this draft, but we've had a service doing this since 2015, I think, and we don't have an all option.
Okay.
Okay, so that drained the mic queue, and we'll go back to going over these points and asking the room for information or thoughts. So first was the patch format for differences. And I think the question was, so already I think we've had an agreement that there should only be one format that should be returned for diff. The question is, what should that format be? And the current proposal is an augmentation to the patch format. And the question is if that's sufficient, or if there should be another format. In particular, something that may be called Yang diff, a diff format. So instead of augmenting patch, maybe we should actually have a format that's very specifically customized for returning diffs. Did I capture that correct, Alex?
Yeah, this is correct. But bearing in mind basically that there is no separate Yang diff format that has been proposed yet. We do think actually it can be done using the augmentation of the patch format, but we could of course define it. But yeah, that is correct.
So yeah.
Rob Wilson, Cisco. So I wouldn't define a diff format as part of this work. If that was to be done, I'd do it as a separate RFC. So I would say do patch format now, but hopefully design it in such a way that it could be extended to cover a different format in future, if that's feasible.
Okay, so actually, I think what I was saying before is that at last time's meeting, we concluded that there should only be one format, that we shouldn't, so what you're saying is let's reopen and possibly support multiple formats.
I think if we're going to choose one format, choose the one we already have. So rather than define a new one. So if it's already concluded we only want one format, then use Yang patch. That seems fine.
Okay. Okay. Objections? Does anyone else have a comment about this? So as myself, as a contributor, I do worry just a little bit about if we are augmenting Yang patch, that the patch format, it just seems a little bit awkward to me. And I worry that I do think this is going to be an important feature and one that we'll be living with for a long time. And I think that it would behoove ourselves to actually ensure that we pick a format that is ideal for this purpose. And in particular, imagine us needing to extend the format in the future or maybe Yang patch changes in the future, and they're coupled in such a nasty way that we don't get to do what, we don't get to separate them easily.
So I also don't mind, Rob Wilton, I also don't mind if you want to define a diff format. Again, I still wouldn't define it in this document. I still think that's better to define generically and reference it from this. If the proposal is to use Yang diff instead of Yang patch, that also is fine with me. But it's going to slow down this work, though, if you do that, I think, by whatever time it takes to define a Yang diff format.
Okay, so I guess that's the question then. Let's see, how should we phrase the questions?
Well, I guess I have 3 questions, right?
Yeah.
Okay. The other question is whether to also revert on the earlier question, and if you want to allow for Yang patch augmented now and then basically something different later.
Okay, that's a good question. All right, so let's start with that, because if we are able to support multiple diff formats or return different diff formats, then we can almost let go of the other remaining questions. That's the first question. So right, so we're going to ask 2 questions. First is to who supports, and then the second will be who does not support. So for those who do support the idea of just returning a single format, that there's no option for the client to specify the format, please raise your hand.
That wasn't clear to me. I'm not
Okay.
sure if it was clear to the room.
All right, you want to rephrase?
I think the question you were asking is who supports restricting the return to a single format? So who would like only a single format? And the second question is who wants to allow multiple formats? Right, but I'm just thinking, so people know.
Okay, so the first
Single format.
Single format, please raise your hand. There's very few, thank you. Support multiple formats. And also a few, but statistically more, a lot more. So then, that then effectively reverts the decision that we had from last time. And if we allow for multiple formats, then my objection for moving forward with this format now is obviated. I no longer worry about it because I know we can fix it later. So then I think we don't need to ask any more questions. We can move forward with this format.
So Robert and Cisco, to clarify, I support multiple formats, but a restricted small set of them, probably limited to 2.
Sure. Okay. Well, they would presumably go through the working group, and the work group would only adopt the work if it was reasonable to do so. That's self-limiting.
Well, one question one question is how we would do that practically. Earlier, basically, we had a flag that basically allowed to specify the format, basically the preference for format. If this is about but if you're saying that we need to allow for future formats, I'm not sure how we could say it's only this or one other format which has not been defined yet.
Okay, great. So moving on to the second bullet point then. Should parameter be included to control whether or not to include origin metadata when operational as the comparison target? So I know we all have to remember everything that Alex said before, but hopefully that's clear. Again, yes, no. So should a parameter be included? If you believe that a parameter should be included to control whether or not the origin metadata should be returned, please raise your hand. There's very few. And then I think the option is that there be no parameter specified and that the, Alex, help me here. If no parameter is specified, is origin metadata returned or not returned?
Yeah, well, then it would just be returned by default.
Returned by default. Okay. So actually, maybe if, in case that wasn't clear, actually, let me restart that. Okay, because I'm not sure if everyone was clear by that. So if you think that that there's no parameter and origin metadata should be returned by default, please raise your hand. Okay, there's no one raised. Okay, sorry, go ahead, the mic.
So Rob Wilson, so not all devices will necessarily support origin metadata. So the question really is whether it's better to have that as an input parameter such that you'd fail the request if you can't support it, or whether you just don't return it if you don't have it. So that's why I prefer having a parameter, because then at least you know as a client whether or not you're going to get this data.
Okay, yeah, I guess that is a good reason to yeah, okay, that's a good point. So this would be in favor of having a parameter to control it, in which case one would explicitly request it, and then we could have an explicit, but if it's not supported, then obviously the request would be denied.
So Alex, you're agreeing with Rob that the parameter is a good
yeah,
idea?
I think this is good. I am agreeing with Rob, yes.
And as a contributor, I agree as well. I think that's a good idea. Okay, so third bullet point, comparison filter to defined using subtree as an XPath as per netconf is the requirement for the definition of filters related to target resource per RESTconf. Okay, Alice, can you go over this bullet point again?
Well, that is basically something that that has been in the draft for a while. So basically, the comparison filter that we use to basically, yeah, the filter spec. But it's a question basically what to include as part of the filter spec, where we say basically which part of the data store to include. And that one, yeah, and this one basically is defined in a as per netconf, or basically in a netconf-ish way, using subtree and XPath, and the issue was brought up in the past, basically whether, well, what about allowing a RESTconf way of defining that, of putting the filter, putting a different format for the filter spec. If you look at it, so if you look at the RPC input, right, this parameter, this filter spec is defined as a, yeah, essentially as a subtree filter or XPath filter. These are the things that we can have.
Okay, so to be clear, you're saying current definition is that either a subtree or an XPath filter could be passed.
Yes.
And the question is whether or not we should extend to support also a third, which would be mimicking RESTconf, like semantics.
Right. That was the issue there. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, when I'm thinking about RESTconf filters, they're, the query parameters. So there's fields, for instance, would be one of them. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah. Actually, on this particular item, I'm not exactly sure. I mean, this was brought up in the past. Obviously, when we defined it, we did not think. We thought actually that what we have, the filter specs that are supplied, are going to be sufficient for what we need to accomplish. So from that perspective, yeah, just as a contributor, if you will, basically, I don't see the need for that. But it was brought up by the group before, and we have listed it as an item in the draft. So this is basically why we need to raise a question. So if there are, if people think we need a different format or an additional format, yeah, we should discuss it.
So the current, it's an RPC, not an action, correct?
That is correct.
The
Mhm.
RPC. So, and the way RESTconf works for the most part is you specify the URL to the node that you wish to operate on, the
Mhm.
resource that you're operating on, which would, in Netconf parlance, would be more like an action as opposed to an RPC.
Mhm.
To the extent that this is an RPC, then in RESTconf terms, it'd be in /operations at a global level. And hence the RESTconf query parameters would not make sense in that context. You would have to have something like what you're suggesting, subtree or XPath filters. I don't believe the option exists. However, if we wanted to support actions instead of RPC, then we could have that conversation. Does anyone else have an opinion about this? It's actually, I don't think this is something poll the room. We're going to poll the room. It's just discussing. It's a discussion point. Anyone wants to mention? No? All right. So, Alex, I think we should probably take this one to the list. It's pretty complicated, but some examples would help.
All right, yeah, or maybe, or I guess maybe if nobody's coming forward with a reason why subtree and XPath would not be sufficient, then we probably just can close this issue.
Sure. Yeah. And actually, we may actually raise why to support both. Should we support both subtree and XPath?
Okay, that's I guess that is a second question. Yeah.
Yeah, because in Netconf at least, subtree is mandatory to implement, where XPath is not. Of course, if you're a RESTconf server and you're not implementing Netconf, you might be, that might be unfortunate. You may not want to do subtree filtering at that point. So, okay. Lastly, the question is: do we add performance considerations section or add a performance considerations? Okay. Oh, this is Tim's thing. So, Tim, did you want to walk us through exactly what it was that you raised on the list? He's approaching the mic.
Yeah, Tim Carey-Nokia. So when we read the draft, there were some concerns in terms of an implementation because we have some very constrained servers, right? That if I was given a request to do a diff on some data stores where I don't have the compute resources to return the information being requested, what is the question came back says, what do we do? What is the appropriate response that we should give back? Should we curtail what we have and just provide what we have? Should we give them a, thumb our nose to them or not? Whatever it's supposed to be. We'd like to have that response certainly documented of what happens if we can't fulfill the request, right? And so that's, and then Alex said, well, we've already created some of this in the security section, but in reality, we probably do need some type of performance piece to say, hey, look, if you can't fulfill the request, you should do this type of things for these types of behaviors that you can't fulfill.
But yeah, I guess there was an underlying question on this as well. That one thing was, I mean, obviously, if you cannot fulfill the request, you can always just decline you can just deny it. But I guess the underlying other question relies to, do you want to have some kind of throttling operation, or so you can have only so many requests per time unit or what have you? Or is that something that you would be interested in?
We weren't worried so much about a metering or a throttling aspect of it. Someone else might be. We were just saying, look, we might not necessarily be able to, meet the request coming in. What we wanted was that we wanted the RFC to specify the behavior specifically, so that people that are implementing this will know, what to do.
Sure. Yeah, I think basically what you're asking for is mostly an editorial item, and so I think I think let's just add it. I think if we can get clearer, if it clarifies the things, why not do it? So I would suggest we just add it for the next revision.
So according to my clock, we're almost out of time, but Luz says we're out of time. I actually don't fully understand why it is that you wouldn't be able to fulfill the request. So let's take this up on the mailing list.
Yeah.
And actually, Blue was incorrect. There is items, beverages, and snacks in the break time, and we'll see you in the room next door. 20 minutes.
Okay,
Yeah, to the right, our right, your left.
bye.
Okay, bye. Thanks, Alex.
Everyone who's remote will need to rejoin. We apologize for that. Are we doing any changes?